Good morning, everybody, and a happy Friday. Welcome to the third day of Sustainability Beyond the Rhetoric webinar series at Business in the Community Ireland. We're delighted to have so many of our member companies, of our partner organizations around the world, academia, government, and also some of the business community that are not members of ours yet, which we look forward to working with you. So this has been an amazing week. We started on Tuesday discussing environmental issues. Yesterday, we had a fantastic webinar where we delved deep into meaningful inclusion and what that means, what's the challenge ahead and the role of business. And today we'll be looking at governance. So we are truly delighted to have you today. So before we go ahead, just some very quick housekeeping, only 3 things to remind you. Number 1, we're recording the webinar, just so you know. Number 2, any comments, technical issues, anything you want to add, any questions you have, of course, and we will be encouraging this morning participation. It's the Q&A box at the bottom center of your screen. That's the way in which you communicate with us, and there are several of us on the other end, and we'll be taking care of any questions that you might have. And last but not least, for those of you active on social, hashtag Beyond the Rhetoric, and we certainly look forward to all your comments. So very briefly, for those of you who have not engaged with Business in the Community Ireland before, we are a movement of companies. Over 100 of Ireland's largest companies are our members, and we have been working for 20 years. And in fact, this was supposed to be the week of our 20th anniversary conference, a big fancy event in Croke Park that will continue, and I'll tell you more about that later. But what I want to highlight about our work this morning is that 35 of the companies that you see in this slide have certified with the Business Working Responsibly mark, which is our attempt at supporting businesses in a process of continuous improvement. And my colleague Maureen O'Donnell, who leads on our work on certification, will be telling you much more about this in a few minutes. We're really delighted to have organized this series of sessions that we've called Beyond the Rhetoric, because that's exactly what this is about. This is looking beyond the theories, beyond the big explanations, and more concretely into what are the solutions and the issues that businesses are finding for the sustainability challenges ahead. And as we say, this is about the ESG without the jargon. But let's have a very quick look at the agenda for this morning, and then I'll introduce the next section. And what governance is about for me, and if I reflect a second on the ESG series, governance is critical for 2 things. Number 1, governance is the foundation for all the E and the S that it's happening within your businesses and your organization. So without proper governance, there's no roadmap for decarbonization. Without proper governance, there's no meaningful leadership when it comes to inclusion and diversity within your businesses. So it is fundamental, 1, and number 2, it is critical for that interconnectedness that we were discussing 2 days ago between the E, the S, and the G. So I am delighted that through the in-conversation sessions and the panel discussions, we're going to start delving into some of the key issues around governance. I'm delighted that the UN Principles for Responsible Investment and our friends, our colleagues in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development are here with us this morning, alongside 2 of our member companies, Momentum, Support, and Permanent TSB. So it's going to be a really exciting morning. I'm going to step off right now because I don't want to take any more time, and I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of my colleagues, Bernadette Phelan and Maureen O'Donnell. First Bernadette and then Maureen, leading the conversations, and I want to come back at the very end and give you a summation of what this 3 days have been and where we're going forward. Really looking forward for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. My name is Bernadette Phelan. I'm Head of Advisory Services and Business in the Community. And I'm delighted that I'll be talking to 2 speakers for the next 20 minutes or so. And we're going to set the context for the business panel. In exploring the theme of governance for today, we're going to drill into 3 key aspects of it, looking at business purpose and culture, stakeholder engagement, and decision-making within business. And within the current context of business, we're all Be you a business owner, a business leader, a business manager, we're all making decisions right now that we hope will lead to long-term business resilience and business success. So I think decision making is so top of mind at the moment. From a sustainability lens within business and the community, we know that there's a lot of academic and industry research that shows that businesses that have a high maturity within sustainability weather recessions well. We can also see data that is showing that businesses that have sustainability at its core are currently outperforming some of their peers and competitors. We also know that the trend around what is expected of business has changed radically in the last 4 to 5 years. Be you an investor, an employee, your customers, your community, what is asked of business has changed. And the COVID situation, I think, has actually only amplified those trends that we have seen to date. So I'm going to firstly talk to Anastasia Guha, director within the UNPRI. So Anastasia, I'll ask you to pop on your camera. Anastasia is responsible for working with signatory companies in the jurisdictions of North America, Africa, and the Middle East. The UNPRI, established in 2006, has that core function of understanding what ESG factors are, and working with the investor community to understand their implications in terms of investment and ownership decisions. So Anastasia, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think to get us started, it would be great if you could paint a picture of how the investor community lens has changed over the last 3 or 4 years, and what you're seeing now as kind of the really key kind of trends and issues.
Thank you, Bernadette, and thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a really, really crucial moment. And I think that was the case before COVID, but as you say, post-COVID, that's become even more sort of acute. The fact growth in the future is going to have an economic or ecological ceiling and a social floor has become very, very apparent. And the minute you say that, what you're basically saying is all businesses, all corporates, will have to think of those parameters when they operate. Their business strategy, their product services, their treatment of their stakeholders and clients, and their relationship with the community and government. And when you say that, it dramatically shifts what used to be sustainability. You know, we used to say the leaders always had sustainability at their core. It was strategic rather than compliance. But that now it's a matter of survival. And that's been a really strong shift. What that means is, from the investment perspective, is the things we've been struggling with, harmonization, data, standards, are really being able to compare apples and apples and oranges in every sector, will become much more key. They've been key for a while, but they haven't been concentrated on. But also there'll be a race to get them done, to get those harmonizations done, to get those standards. And Rodney, who's speaking after this, is one of our partners, is our key partner in trying to help with data standards on this. And I'm sure he'll talk more about that.
Yeah, and I think your opening comments there, you know, completely resonate with the maturity that we've seen from our lens of life in terms of how companies are now approaching the sustainability agenda. You know, the traditional view of your CSR program sitting beside your business, versus, you know, companies that core purpose, their DNA is within that. And I think, you know, sustainability is a journey within the international business community. Within Ireland, there's a full spectrum of companies on that maturity continuum. Mm-hmm. So if you're an investor looking at companies, I'm sure they're not agonizing about where a company is at in that maturity spectrum on their journey. What are they defining as good governance? You know, what are those proxies, those metrics that they're looking for to define good governance?
Gosh, that is a very difficult question. And the reason it's difficult is because investors don't look at companies in isolation. They look typically at sectors, and they look at how the company is performing versus its peers. So, you know, when you were talking about CSR, you know, CSR was very much from a, you know, I'm going to be perfectly honest, from an investor point of view, it was almost irrelevant because it has no impact on your product services suite, on what you do. It's almost, it was a philanthropy add-on in the way that it was it operated perhaps a decade ago. This is not that. This is how are you going to grow in the future, keeping these barriers in mind? And potentially, are you in an industry, or do you have the expertise, either at the board level or at the executive level, to take advantage of what is likely to happen in the future? I mean, we are heading to the fourth industrial revolution, the decarbonization of economies. We're going to have to produce things, sell things, and consume things in a different way. Are you in a position to take advantage of that? And in a way, COVID's really exacerbated this, because you can see, by the way, not in a good way, in some ways in a really bad way. Single-use plastic, as we know, has become much more acceptable and prevalent because of the nature of the beast that the virus has placed on economies. But what we find is that businesses are starting to, and in Ireland, we've covered the market for a little while, not directly but through a colleague. And you can see that the government is very into green. I mean, green financing is one of Ireland's sort of great wins in the world of loans over a while. And those sorts of things have to also be accelerated. So the corporates need to think about the opportunity set, but also what their peers are doing. And like they do with any products and services suite, what they can do better or what they can do differently, because that's what's going to make an impact on valuations. But also on sort of future holdings. Yeah. And I think we should think about investors also starting to pivot to debt. So the equity story is a very sort of key one and an important one, and it's what's got us here, so we shouldn't diss it. But we know that, asset owners specifically are net lenders to companies. They're not owners of companies. So we have to also think about how does this work in a fixed income context. And that really lends itself to project work, because the proceeds are to a particular project, or they can be to a particular project. I mean, Ireland has a real ability to really explode its green loans, green bonds, social bonds market. And it's going to be in competition. But as we were talking about this, Bernadette, the green regulations of the EU impact Ireland, and the rest of the world is watching, because even though it's a relatively small country, it's the only common law country left in the European Union. So the way that the taxonomy, the EU Sustainable Action Plan is implemented, Ireland's going to be watched by the world.
Yeah, and I think, within that is the business opportunity of becoming experts within those product ranges, but also the implications for the business itself, because again, in our one of our earlier conversations, Anastasia was looking at the you're seeing more of sustainability linked loans. Like for us within Ireland, obviously ESB in February of this year announced theirs. So across all the different kind of financial mechanisms, you can see that very kind of strong pattern emerging. Within the audience that are online at the moment, there's a full spectrum of large business and SMEs. And in terms of the spirit of our theme being beyond the rhetoric, what would be kind of the specific examples you could cite, be it, a cautionary tale that we could learn from, or, a really good examples that you can give to, really put kind of some flesh on the concepts?
Yeah, look, what I will say is that this is not going to be easy for any business. This is going to be hard, but perhaps in a way it's a classic, a strong board would really relish this challenge, but it is a challenge. So let's not beat about the bush. The reason it's a challenge is because the difference between what is legal, which is something that boards have typically considered. I mean, the job of a board is to stay on the right side of the law and to fulfill their fiduciary obligations and to make money for shareholders in the past. And all of those are being upended. So in terms of the law, you're finding that you could be on the right side of the law, but on the wrong side of public opinion, including the opinion of the investors. And there, we were talking about the example of Rio Tinto. Now, Rio Tinto in the last few weeks, very, very recent example, have had a terrible time. And the reason they've had a terrible time is because they had these very iron ore rich caves in Western Australia, in the Pilbara region, that have been inhabited for 46,000 years by indigenous people. They got in 2013 permission from the Western Australian federal government, because it's a federal system in Australia, to blast those and take the extract no pun intended, the 100 million USD value of the iron ore that sort of those caves were sitting on. And this is a pretty common practice in mining. Unfortunately, they actually blasted those mines many, many years later when public opinion had shifted quite dramatically. There's a question whether the Western Australian province would give them that permission in 2020. But anyhow, they did have that permission. They did something entirely legal. But the backlash of it has led to the resignation of their CEO. And, you know, that's a really, really interesting thing because you did something that was legal, but you led to a pretty sort of important and destabilizing change in governance because you've lost your executive leader off the back of public opinion. So how does a business negotiate this? And I think what we need, as we do with COVID more generally, but with ESG more you know, sort of on a long-term basis, is the ability to be agile. You have to look at what's material for your particular sector and make sure that those metrics within your firm are as good as you can make them. And you can't always know the unknown unknowns, but know that there will be one.
Yeah, solid advice. And I think as well, it also, you know, you're echoing the fundamental of our work as well, that sustainability, this is beyond compliance, because compliance is just the floor that you're working from in terms of stakeholder expectations. We're actually running out of time, Anastasia. So I know in terms of the economic landscape ahead, it's going to be pretty tough, but what would be your reason for hope or optimism when you look at the sustainability agenda?
I think, frankly, unfortunately, off a very bad crisis, but never waste a good crisis and all that, I actually think the sustainability agenda has always been, but has become a massive juggernaut. But what's added post-COVID is urgency. You know, I've worked in the business for a decade, and I know that what I've always been frustrated about is the lack of urgency. I mean, everyone understands this is inevitable, but there's been a lack of urgency. And I think that has changed because you can see that it's potentially biodiversity loss has led to this happening. And what else is coming next? And there's a real sense that, unlike before, there was always a sense that there's never going to be a carbon price because, you know, governments are not going to do that. It's too problematic for large fossil fuel producing economies like Australia and Canada and others. Well, government has stopped economic activity for 6 months to save lives. And sustainability, unfortunately, is at that same level. So anything is possible from a regulatory perspective. And that makes people, you know, that sort of really focuses the mind of what needs to be done urgently.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. Too brief a conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, and we look forward to talking to the UN PRI during the course of our own work over the next few years as well. So thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Rodney Irwin to switch on his camera. Good morning, Rodney. As we were saying in our agenda there, Rodney is a managing director within the World Business Council, who are an international network of business leaders focused on the sustainability agenda, and business in the community are one of their global partners for a number of years. Rodney leads out on their education and redefining value programs. Within Redefining Value, there's a whole suite of international initiatives looking at working with business about how they manage their risk, competitive advantage, and the opportunities within ESG. So Rodney, delighted to be talking to you, and to kickstart our conversation, the concept I'm going to put on the table is that of stakeholder capitalism. It's a concept that's been with us, I think, since the 40s, 50s, but it is in vogue at the moment. It was the theme of Davos. We're seeing reports coming out of the World Economic Forum. Last year, the US Business Roundtable put it as a key tenet within their own agenda. So firstly, can you define what stakeholder capitalism is and why, as an Irish business, it's relevant to you or potentially relevant to you?
Indeed. Thank you, Bernadette, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Yeah, what is it? Well, it's actually been around since the 1930s, and it's nothing new in that respect. It's the way we used to do business. At its very simplest, stakeholder capitalism is the notion that companies can focus on meeting the needs of all of its stakeholders, whether they be customers, employees, partners, or indeed the community and society at large. And not just focus on one stakeholder. Now, the narrative of the last 40 years has been dominated by maximizing shareholder value. And that model, which really started with our friend Milton Friedman telling us that we were all puppets if we did anything other than maximize profitability, became a dominant force in the business world. And pretty much everybody that's on this call will have been taught that. The business of business is business. It has been the central feature of economics since the 1970s. And a lot of people have benefited from it, but they've done so at the expense of many others. And in 2019, I think it's become somewhat clear that it's now an embarrassing concept for business. If you're pursuing profitability at all costs, then as Anastasia was just saying, the court of public opinion does not hold you very highly. And we even saw our American cousins, perhaps the most, the community that embraced shareholder capitalism the most, maximizing that shareholder value the most. In 2019, the Business Roundtable over there came out publicly saying, you know, this is unsustainable. We need to change the purpose of the corporation such that we don't just pursue one direction of value creation. We need to be cognizant of others. And COVID-19, the fragility of the business environment has magnified that problem. And so, you know, with the World Economic Forum's meeting in Davos this year being focused on stakeholder capitalism, with, dare I say it, even CFOs talking about it, we're at a point in time where I think the business community are looking for something else to pursue, and that's the current climate, the current crisis, the current reality that we're facing has proven that the last 40 years has led us very much down a garden path to which there's a cliff edge. And so this notion of stakeholder capitalism is now being mooted about. Now, what does it mean? There is no universally accepted definition. And how does it fit in with existing regulatory environment is also a bit of a challenge. But at least we now have a conversation starting that businesses and the people that lead them and the people that govern them from a governance perspective need to perhaps wake up and be less welded to the comfort zone that they've had over, well, we're only here to maximize our profits. And therefore all other stakeholders are dispensable. No anymore, not anymore.
So the conditions that businesses are operating in are quite changed. So I'm kind of picking up from what you're saying is you do feel that the concepts are going to be genuinely applied, that we may be on a trajectory that we can see kind of that lasting systemic change of the role, the purpose of business. And when you look at that, if that is true, what are the concrete kind of evidence points that you would go to show that it is real, be it within an individual kind of company, or what are, you know, the kind of signals at that macroeconomic level? You know, again, back to the theme of today being, are we really beyond the rhetoric? What would be your kind of proof points?
Well, I think there have been some examples of business leaders behaving more stakeholder capitalism inclusive than perhaps they may have been in the past. So, you know, the open letters and blogs that have come out of Unilever CEO Alan Job very early made a very clear statement that at Unilever during lockdown they would be making sure they took care of the more vulnerable people in their supply chain to make sure that they would continue to provide employment, albeit remotely, for people involved in their catering and security, etc. Yeah. This is a shift in, if you like, away from the traditional shareholder model, which would be, this is an opportunity to save cost and maximize profits. Therefore, what Alan did in that instance was an evidence of a shift in leadership towards a more inclusive form of decision making. And we're starting to see some activity also at a national level, whereby companies that have benefited from government bailouts, whether they're in New Zealand through to Canada, are now being linked to behaving differently towards ESG considerations going forward, and are in many ways being handcuffed to green or social strings that that wouldn't necessarily have been there as a result of COVID. Now, this year is going to be the year when we always look back and say, what were the things we said this year the most often? I think the things we've said most often are, you're unmute. I mean, that's the thing that, I mean, everybody's heard that this year. Please unmute, we can't hear you. But other things that we've heard this year are that that things need to change, that you cannot waste a crisis. And my favorite, which comes from Rudyard Kipling, is that necessity is the mother of invention. And I think we are now at a point where if we don't recreate the purpose and role of business and its relationship with the societies within which it operates, then, you know, that cartoon that many of us in sustainability we've seen of two people on a desert island saying, well, we used to have lovely shareholder value, will become a reality. So I think we now need to look to our politicians and our regulators to start making this notion of stakeholder capitalism more accessible in a world that is dominated by regulation, that puts pressure on businesses to behave in the best interests of the investor. That's not to say investors are not an important stakeholder, but we need to have investors realizing that investing in companies just to get quick short-term returns is not in their interests, and that, you know, the societal perspectives of that are starting to look pretty poor. So I think there are examples, and at WBCSD we created a dedicated website in wbcsd.org where members of the public and other businesses can go and see what large multinationals are doing to address this crisis, and what evidence there is of this this shift, or this starting towards a shift towards stakeholder capitalism. As I said, Unilever is just one good example that comes to mind.
Yeah, and we know from our own membership base as well, again, the company response has been so strong. Back to kind of the the urgency piece, but also the conditions in which business is operating in now. We would still face, I think, that barrier of sustainability and the investment you make within it been viewed as a cost within the business, whereas obviously we view it as an investment for resilience. Because I think we're at that point where it's the risk of inaction due to the short-term pressures now that companies will kind of park their sustainability journey saying, I can't afford to do this, I don't have the capacity. How do you address that mindset? Or
yeah, well, I think there's a number of things that need to play and need to be accelerated. Sustainability has, in my opinion, for too long been a communications exercise. We've been obsessed with disclosure of our brilliance, and have produced reports, and they've been multi-stakeholder in nature, blah, blah, blah. The reason why maximizing shareholder value as a concept really became the slave to which we all worked was because the people who managed businesses were able to make decisions based on information flows that they were able to rely upon. And this is where sustainability, in my opinion, has failed. It has tended too much and too often to appeal to the emotional connection of the decision maker as opposed to the logical reaction of the decision maker. And has not invested time and expertise in the identification of what really is material to the business, both in terms of its impacts to the society and the environment, but also in terms of its dependencies on natural and social resources. And it's tended to sort of give the very light touch to that. It has been obsessed with financial data, and where sustainability has been considered important, it's been more fluffy. That needs to change. If sustainability, maybe this is where I get my soapbox, so apologies everybody, but you know, I'm Irish and I have an opinion. But sustainability is not a department. It is not a job title. It is not a profession. It's not even an association like WBCSD or BC or Business in the Community Ireland. It's the end result of a corporate strategy that actually understands its impacts and dependencies on nature and society. It is not a report. It's not a job title, but that end result. And too many businesses have failed in that. They've considered it as something you bolt onto the side or as something that makes you feel good about yourself. Well, tough. That has to change. And if sustainability wants to come in from the code, then it needs to become strategic and it needs to become commercial. Now, stakeholder capitalism, there's actually a piece in Forbes that came out earlier this year that sort of criticized that stakeholder capitalism may fail. And what it advocates is that we need to look at customer capitalism. And I think in some respects, that's correct, because businesses need to continue to generate cash. They need to generate products that people want to buy or services that people want to engage with. But they need to do so in a sustainable way, i.e. that the impact of those services and products are maximizing societal welfare and minimizing environmental damage. And only by that integration into corporate strategy will we see sustainability be taken seriously. And when the finance department are as involved in the creation of data for ESG impacts and dependencies as they are on finance, then I think we'll have arrived.
Thank you, Rodney. I think a powerful call to arms to business and to the sustainability professionals. I would garner, hopefully, that within your statements that you very much feel we have the capacity and bandwidth to do it, and that's the line of direction that we're going in. So as with Anastasia, too short, thank you so much for sharing your views with us. Look forward to talking to you again in the future. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Maureen O'Donnell, who will introduce the business panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bernadette. Thanks, Rodney and Anastasia. Wow, that was absolutely fascinating and really thought-provoking. Appreciate the conversation. So for our next panel, we have two of our member company representatives from our member companies who are going to be joining me here on the virtual stage. We have Ger Mitchell first, our HR and Corporate Development Director for Permanent TSB. Ger, if I could ask you to turn on your camera and unmute your mic, thank you very much. And we're going to be talking today with you first, and we'll be talking a little bit about Permanent TSB and your journey in sustainability. Permanent TSB is one of Ireland's oldest financial institutions. It's been in operation for more than 200 years, which is incredible. The website credits trusted relationships with customers and playing an active role in communities as the foundation of a sustainable business. What I heard Rodney say, which I thought was just really provoking, is that in order for sustainability to really move forward with companies, it's got to be strategic and it's got to be commercial. Can you talk a little bit about that from Permanent TSB's perspective, particularly with respect to the role of governance in building your sustainable business?
Sure, Maureen. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge Anastasia and Rodney. A truly inspiring start to the morning, and thank you so much for your inputs. So I guess, Maureen, what I might do is just maybe give you a sense philosophically as to how we think about sustainability and the role of governance therein. And I think it's important to say to everybody, we're not speaking from a pillar of perfection here. We're very much in the early stages of trying to regrow and rebuild our business. So we're learning our way forward, and we're sincerely committed to doing so. So we have a lot of weaknesses that we need to strengthen, and we have a lot of ills that we need to recover from. but we are on our way. So I wouldn't want anyone thinking that we're speaking from a position of moral authority here. We're not. So when I think about sustainability, I'm very much taken by Rodney's comment here with regards to, understanding our impact as we meet stakeholder needs today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And Rodney's comments reminded me of a quote I read in James Kerr's book about the New Zealand All Blacks, where he spoke about being a good ancestor. And this is really about the philosophy of planting trees today that you'll never see. And when we think about sustainability, there's something about that that really resonates with us. And then when we think about, governance and the role of governance, and I'm conscious this is beyond the rhetoric section, so I'm not going to give any technical definitions here, but I guess in a word, I think about governance as leadership. It's really about how we lead and how we care for our business being our colleagues, our customers, the communities in which we serve, because as any business, we are a community serving a community. And there isn't just one community, there is a multiplicity of communities. So when we talk about leadership, we talk about trust, and we talk about the character of leadership. We talk about integrity and accountability. We talk about dependability. We talk about benevolence. We talk about connection and intimacy in terms of being proximate to what's happening with consumers and with what's happening with our workforce and broader society. So corporate governance, I guess, too often has got caught up in a whole lot of technical terms and frameworks and what have you. And it's understandable that we do need consistency in that regard. But I guess at its heart, corporate governance is about how do we lead the performance or the direction of our business? And how do we, at a minimum, conform with the rules of the land and the law of the land, regulation, risk appetites, the various control frameworks, and all of that. And if done properly, we are absolutely convinced that it will lead to long-term sustainability. It will help us rebuild battered reputations. Banks the world over lost the right to govern themselves coming out of the last financial crisis. And we moved from a principle-based model of regulation to a rules-based one. So we have to rebuild trust with society and with all stakeholders. And if we do, we are convinced, and I am convinced that we have a chance at rebuilding those reputations and become a much more attractive investment vehicle for new capital. So if I can maybe take it through in terms of how we see this connecting then with your question about commercial strategy. Well, really and truly, it is about our purpose. And purpose that is sourced in our values and divined from our values. We see this as the animating force here in terms of achieving sustainability. Purpose really does provide that consistency in terms of decision making, which is, as Rodney outlined, is really much broader than just washing ourselves around a particular banner or fancy communications. It is really about who we are and what we stand for. And purpose really does ignite and spark participation at every level across our organization. And that's what we're trying to really do. And then I guess from a board perspective, in terms of how the board think about this, well, we need to have a very clearly articulated way in which our values are effectively upheld. How those values help balance short and long-term interests. And then I guess the whole piece about alignment in terms of how do we align everything from our commercial goals to our codes of conduct, our values, our reward. And I might just finish this section by just, again, picking up on one of Rodney's points here. I remember in 2018, Christine Lagarde, who was then in the IMF, spoke at a conference in Dublin, and she spoke about organizations being as passionate, and there needs to be as passionate about values as they were on company values, and there needs to be as passionate about culture as they are on capital. So I think I couldn't sum it up any better than Madame Lagarde.
Absolutely. And I know that you were talking earlier, when we were talking earlier this week, you were talking about creating a safe culture, and you were just referencing this idea of building trust. It's interesting to me because when I think of governance in some respects, I'm thinking about the internal controls and structures that you're putting in place. But for you, it's about it seems to be about the values and the very much the human element of all of this. I suppose also just thinking about it from you're a highly regulated sector. There's also, I suppose, the external role of the regulators, and Rodney was mentioning that politicians and regulators, they really need to step up and they need to hold organizations accountable. But do you, I suppose, see that that focus on individual accountability, particularly from the most senior levels, the leadership of the organization, in an external regulated environment, is that going to do the trick, or do you think that that's just something that's kind of a safety switch if the internal culture doesn't pan out? Can you give me just a little bit of an idea from an external versus internal perspective, how those things work together to ensure good governance?
Okay, no problem at all. So I guess where I might start here first is I'm going to start with the same word I used on governance, which is really about leadership. So be it internally or externally, the character of leadership and high trust leadership is absolutely fundamental to building trust and to corporate governance and to taking care of all stakeholders. Without trust, and again, you know, I've gone to describe elements of trust here, but you know, competence, ability, integrity, accessibility, but leadership behavior here in terms of creating internally a safe environment, and the term psychological safety, you see it on a lot of feeds at the moment, and it's a key thing. And the key enablers of this here, you know, relate to behavioral integrity in terms of the consistency between words and deeds, behavioral consistency, being consistent over time, and looking to create predictability in situations whereby there is complete consistency. The sharing and delegation of decision-making and control, the quality of communications, the demonstration of concern, and having the interests of people at heart. So, like if we think about you know, the society in which we live right now, because this has a huge context in terms of actually how we lead organizations, everything from ethical living to the desire for authentic products, smart technology, conscious consumers, the desire for frictionless experiences, you know, at a time of increased competition, you know, and limitless consumer choice, trust and the role of leadership and the importance of organizational purpose is just so fundamental to our survival. So that's the internal and external piece. I think I wouldn't put anything between internally or externally, because we can talk about frameworks and rules and regulation, but it's much more difficult to hurdle over strong character than it is to bypass a rule or a regulation or a checklist. So when we think about regulation then, and you know, again, these are my views on regulation. Regulation are very, very necessary, that they're part of, I guess, what you would term calculus-based trust, along with laws. Regulation, you know, provide very sound guidance, and in many respects, in layman's language, you know, they provide a tram line. You know, they set standards, they articulate expectations, and they do act as a deterrent. Crucially, however, you know, it is arguable that there is no such thing as a construct called regulated trust. You know, trust is something that has to be earned, and regulation can only do so much in that regard. So, I guess the regulation of culture, trust, and leadership behaviour is something that the Central Bank of Ireland and central banks across the world are really trying to focus in on. And I guess one of the tools in which they are using in that regard and thinking about using in an Irish context is the Senior Executive Accountability Regime. And I'm happy to maybe share some of that, Maureen, if you wish, in terms of our views on that. But I'm just conscious of time, so it's really up to you.
I think you're absolutely right, Ger. And I apologize. I would love to speak with you more. I think we've just kind of run out of time here, but What I heard you say once again was this idea of trust and rebuilding trust, and the individual accountability that has to be built into your culture, aligned around a series of values. If you don't have that, then all of the good internal controls and external regulation in the world is not going to make any sort of a difference. And going back, I suppose, to the mission of Permanent TSB of creating a sustainable business, this appears to be the foundation from which you're building moving forward.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So thank you very much, Maureen. And I guess I might just finish with just by saying that, you know, key to building sustainable growth as we see it is really about alignment, organizational alignment around sustainability, which has a purpose-driven strategy, accountable, authentic, and high trust leadership within a high trust culture. And if we can get those elements properly balanced and weighted and interacting with each other, I believe we have a chance to rebuild our reputation and to build a sustainable organization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jer. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If I could ask you to turn off your camera and mute your mic, and then Ian, if I could ask you to please turn on your camera, and there we go. Hi, Ian, how are you?
Very well. Good morning, Maureen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So we have Ian Anderson, who is the Group Chief Operating Officer for Momentum Support. I suppose just going back to the sector that Jer is working in, it's Permanent TSB, it's the banking sector, it's highly regulated. It's a public company. Momentum Support is a private business-to-business company, and I'm guessing that our audience may not know that much about Momentum Support. Could you just tell us a little bit about your company?
Yeah, Maureen, thank you. Well, Momentum Support are actually a privately owned organisation, and we provide outsourced services throughout the whole of Ireland, primarily contract and industrial cleaning, as well as security services and administration support. We work across many sectors of business, so from office to retail, food production and manufacturing, into healthcare and transport. Our customer base ranges from very small size companies through to medium, large scale government and multinational organizations. So for example, in our retail business, we provide cleaning and security services for a lot of large shopping centres across Ireland. In the transport sector, we provide services on public buses, on trains, in airports, terminal buildings. And of course, in healthcare, we provide services both in private healthcare establishments as well as many large acute hospitals throughout Ireland. We would have a diverse workforce of around 2,500 staff. And many of those staff, I have to say, are in the category of minimum wage. So, you know, it is an extremely price sensitive industry that we're in. And as a result, we operate on very low profit margins. So as you can imagine, it is a very competitive business. And to be fair, it is a business and an industry where the value of the work that our staff is often underestimated. But it's actually amazing to see at the minute in the current climate of the pandemic, how more and more people are actually recognizing the importance of cleaning in the work environment.
And it's interesting because, as you say, you're a tight margin business. It's a very competitive sector. And yet you've invested a lot in CSR. And it's funny because we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about CSR, we're throwing those terms around. In my mind, they basically mean the same thing, which is this aspect of environmental social responsibility wrapped around a structure of governance. So can you just tell me a little bit about why you've chosen to invest in CSR and a little bit about the structure and the culture that you put in place?
Okay, well, I suppose it is quite interesting to hear some of the previous speakers talking about sort of agility and then the shift in mindset, particularly in stakeholder capitalism. I mean, CSR for us is something that we see as extremely important to the future sustainability of our business. But we look at it very much also from a moral basis, and it is something that's exceptionally valuable to us. As a cleaning and a security services provider, our product is primarily people, and it's those people that really make our business successful. So, you know, because we are a privately owned company, one of the basic principles and the core values of our founder and owner, Colin Maybin, has always been to make sure we're looking after our people and that we play our part in local communities. So, that's something that's always been at the heart of who we are. Our company was established back in 1982 from scratch, and we have grown organically over the years to around about a 60 million turnover now. So that's a totally different business, and it does require much more corporate focus. However, it is equally important that we retain the basic principles and core values within that culture. We would have a very strong culture around ethics, about empowering our people, making sure we're sticking and delivering on our promises to our customers, and making sure we're really encouraging people to do the right things by all our stakeholders. So I think it's really important to recognise that as part of governance, because it demonstrates that it's not all about legislative requirements and the adherence to accreditation criteria. It is equally about balancing morals and doing the right thing. That said, we have seen massive transformation in our company over the years. And I've talked there about the growth that we have seen, which has been absolutely fabulous. And we hope that continues into the futures. But, we see CSR as being a big priority for us in actually achieving that. But with that growth for us comes a massive increase in our employee base. And with that increase in employee base also comes a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different skill sets. And that hits us in two different forms. One that would be from direct recruitment campaigns that we would do, and also from two-base situations. So where we actually win a piece of business, the employees that actually are currently on that contract have the legal right to transfer to us. So we then have to adapt those terms and conditions of those people that transfer across to us. So then we have the size and the type of our customers. So, we have very small customers versus very large multinational customers. And those guys have very, very different expectations. They have very different resources within each of their companies. So, that in itself throws up many, many challenges for us when it comes to governance. So whilst reviewing our business strategy a number of years ago, we actually recognized that we were at a stage where we needed to put more structure around activities that we were carrying out, particularly in the zone of CSR and social value, and formalize them a wee bit more so that we were getting a bit more recognition for the outputs, because we did sort of feel that we were underselling ourselves a bit. In the past, we always did think we were very, very good at doing things and social activities, but it was just the done thing in the organization. And again, we felt we had a massive gap there, that we needed to quantify things and the overall contribution. So we decided at that stage to invest in setting up a specific CSR and governance division. We expanded our HR division, set up a dedicated learning and development division. And at that stage, we also joined business in the community as a key partner to help us take our journey to the next level. So the teams pulled together, they created a revised strategy, and they drafted some systems and processes in order to help us to develop that culture. But, given the nature of the work that we do and the diverse culture, a diverse, I suppose, customer background that we operate with, one of the key considerations for us had to be that our business required a lot of agility, a lot of flexibility and adaptation to change. And that's where, for me, it was very interesting to hear as Anastasia actually referred to that as well. Our customer expectations vary from one site to another, and we have to be very adaptable to that, particularly where our staff work across sites or across various sectors of the business. So Rodney also mentioned about supply chains, and we equally have our own supply chain in terms of actually delivering the services to our customers. But when a customer contracts us to do a piece of business, we then also become part of their supply chain. So in that sense, we're very much an integrated business. So when it comes to governing our policies and procedures, or the things that we do, we're often governed by our customers' policies and procedures as well as our own. Ger talked there about sort of the culture in their organization. And for us, it's extremely important that our workforce understand that and have that sort of mindset. And that as business leaders, that we have a duty of care to actually facilitate them with the tools to deal with the various suppose situations that they face. So I suppose from a governance perspective, for me, it's extremely important not only just to have those written statements that are seen, and as someone referred to earlier as window dressing, but to ensure they can be flexible and they're absolutely driven and championed from the top of the organisation as key behaviours.
Thank you, Ian. And we're about out of time, but just 30 seconds, if I could ask you, excuse me. You talked about a whole lot in that last bit where you've talked about agility, you've talked about leadership, you've talked about the nature of a thin margin business. I suppose just going back to this idea of agility and COVID, you had to respond quite quickly to the COVID crisis. Your business model got quite disrupted. Can you just give us in just 1 minute what happened there and how governance supported that?
Well, actually, this is where I believe, suppose governance has to have a balance between process and culture. COVID was a great example of where the key skills and the culture of our organisation really stood up to the test and served us well. The amount of flexibility and change that our staff have had to endure has been absolutely phenomenal, and the speed at which they have had to do that had to adapt has been immense. We're extremely proud of how they've responded to that, not only for our company, but equally how they've supported their customers and actually their colleagues as well. Wellbeing initiatives that we have put in place and invested in have really added so much value during this time. And in particular, some that come from some of our charity partners that we support, and they've proven to be absolutely priceless. So, because as a contractor, all our employees don't work in the same place, our customers have different needs, different outlooks, different priorities, and we all have to consistently nurture that to ensure we support our employees. So, it's been absolutely crucial during this time. When we look at manufacturing, hospitality, when they closed, a massive proportion of our staff felt they were going to lose their jobs. Healthcare, on the other hand, they required immense support in terms of resources, but it was an unknown and a fearful territory for a lot of people. Then we had families outside of Ireland who wanted to go back to their families. Yes. Travel restrictions had to be considered. And although they are effectively our employees, customers' views differed from site to site. So overall, the internal flexibility that we provide allowed us to support some of those situations, particularly from a capacity perspective.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate your perspective, and I wish we could spend some more time talking about momentum support because it's absolutely fascinating. Mm-hmm. If I could ask you please to turn off your camera and mute your mic. And Thomas, we were going to do a little bit of update on the mark, but I suppose the only thing that I'm going to say is that it is, of course, our standard that examines governance as well as environmental and social. We're making some changes to it. Those changes are going to be happening over the next coming months. We're going to launch it on January 1st, but be around for the celebration on December 9th. That's all I'm going to say, and I'll turn it over to you for our closing.
Thanks, Maureen. And that's all that was needed to be said. Impossible to summarize 3 exceptional webinars in 2 minutes. So I'm just going to use 3 words that in my mind summarize everything that we have heard. And it is set objectives on whatever that you're doing. Take action. This is not just about the communication side, it's about taking the action. And number 3, advocate. We need to use the collective voice of business, the individual voice of business, to really push forward on the governance, on the social and on the environmental agenda, because the challenges ahead of us are enormous. So that's the way in which I'm going to summarize very unfairly, but I do want to take the what's left of this minute to say thank you. To say thank you to the 7 member companies that have participated in this Beyond the Rhetoric series, that have taken the courage to be subjected to our interrogation. Thank you to the 9 companies that are supporting us in this journey that will continue very soon, as you can see on the slide, on the 12th of November in the In Conversation with Paul Polman, and on the 6th of October next year, when we're going to have our Sustainability Revolution conference. And we certainly look forward to seeing you all in November and next year. And a special thanks to all my colleagues in business and the community who have done an enormous work to make this happen, all within the virtual world. My last point, I do sincerely hope that you will take at least one concrete action of what you're going to do to change within your business to make sustainability meaningful and to make sustainability happen. Business in the community is always open and looking for more partnerships and more collaborations, because that's how we're going to make impact happen. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.